I just was messing with it. Thanks. Let's see here.
Morning, Chair.
Good morning, everybody. Let's see. How do I do?
Morning.
Good morning. Trying to get this.
We can see you and hear you.
There we go.
Yes. It was like testing. Yeah, we got it.
Well, good morning, everybody. At this time, we'll call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners informal session for January 14th, 2021. And at this point, we will have our flag salute. So, Commissioner Kula, would you lead us, please?
I'd be honored. Everybody ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. So at this time, we will begin with our calendar session. Does anybody have anything they wanted to add to the calendar other than our usual joint appointments? Commissioner Bershauer?
Chair, I would like to discuss adding, and I don't know if this is the right time or if it should be in announcements, but adding an executive session and an open session regarding the Yamhill West Sider Trail remand. I think that we probably should move forward on addressing that. So,
Okay, Ken and Christian, do we want to schedule something now? Ken, should we go ahead and maybe put something on the books for, what are we looking at? What would your suggestion be, Commissioner?
well, in terms of order, I would prefer to have the executive session first because I think there's some issues that we should discuss internally before we have a public discussion, just for our own benefit. But as soon as possible. I'm not really sure how these things work in terms of calendaring, but as soon as possible.
So go ahead. No, Commissioner Kula, go ahead.
I was going to say that I wanted to ensure that in order to move forward, Commissioner Bershauer knew that she had support in that. I think it would be a good thing. And so I'm in support of having a work session. I think I don't need to have an executive session versus an open session. But I think that if Commissioner Bershauer, sorry, thinks that we should have an executive session as part of it, and that's appropriate for the discussion, I'm happy to accommodate that. And I'm also, if we need some time to gather materials, maybe 2 weeks. Do you think that's reasonable, like the 28th?
That sounds, Christian, was there anything that you would need some time for, or is this something we could just go ahead and plan?
I think we can go ahead and plan. if we wanted to have the executive session before or scheduled separately from the formal session so that you could then have the discussion following executive session and open session. We could certainly schedule them separately. I know we have some technological concerns about having an executive session during a formal session. I think we've held them immediately after, and that way we can turn off the streaming part of it. So if the desire would be to have a discussion in open session, say on the 28th, we could schedule the executive session for 1 or 2 or 3 or more days prior to the 28th. And I think we'd be ready to discuss, and I'm just throwing this out there as a possibility. If we said, for example, have an executive session on the 26th, and then you could have if the board were ready after the executive session to have that conversation in open session on the 28th. That might be a schedule that works.
Ken? Is that
I would agree.
okay? Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Kula on this in terms of not specifically seeing a need for an executive session, but I know that I had that question as well, and Christian and I talked, and really everything we talked about was something that I believe is important to talk about in open session. But I do understand that there might be some issues that might be better suited for executive session. So I think that might be prudent, and then we'll sort of get up to speed and consider it in terms of just more in-depth discussion on issues that are, because this is so complicated.
Well, we can make sure that we limit the scope of the executive session to those attorney-client privileged aspects of the conversation that are appropriate for the executive session. And then if there are more fact-specific or background or context portions of that conversation, we can make sure and have those in open session.
Okay, that sounds good. So then do we have a time recommendation for Tuesday, the 26th? Would 10 o'clock work for everybody? What do we have at, would 10 o'clock work for an executive session?
It would work for me. I know that Ken and Christian and I typically have our meeting, our weekly meeting at that time, so we're all free.
It works for me, Chair.
10 o'clock on the 26th? Okay. So let's go ahead and plan that. And then also then on Thursday, the 28th, we'd be able to have more discussion in open session about what our options would be going forward on the trail issue.
Yeah, and I believe one of you had mentioned a work session. Ken, I don't know if this would be appropriate to put on the agenda as a work session, or if it would simply be another discussion item on the agenda.
I think it really depends on what the board wants to do. If I think it's completely up to the board if you want to schedule it as more of a work session, or if you actually want to make it, and that could also be something that comes out of the executive session as well, if there's a specific.
Yeah, beyond, I'm not aware of a specific action item that we would need to come out of the executive session and vote on beyond. And this is sort of a precursor to what we'll talk about, but everyone's aware that we received the remand from LUBA. The next step in the process would be for the board to decide whether or not, as the applicant, we're interested in submitting a letter to the planning department requesting that they schedule that remand hearing. So if that's, for example, something that is discussed in the executive session and we have a decision on that, that isn't, again, something that would need to be acted on formally, I don't believe, in formal session, but we could have a discussion about it. And if the board wanted to act on that, they could take that action then the following Thursday. But other than that, I'm not aware of another item that would be a standalone item on the agenda at this point.
So I'll go ahead and schedule it if, as a work session. We can put it on the agenda.
Makes sense.
As a work session, if that's okay with the board.
That way it'll go first too, in case we get department updates, or I guess there'd be department updates first, but we'll get it while we're all fresh, right?
Sounds good. Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else for the calendaring? All right, we'll move on to public comment. We did receive some public comments that I believe, commissioners, you received copies of in your emails. And next we have a work session, which we have none. Department updates, we have none. Item G, we have a consent agenda, and we'll go ahead as per our agreement and our discussions that we'll go ahead and just, I'll entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
I think that
Oh,
I think that Christian wants to say something. I was about to say Commissioner Burnish. Not everybody here is a
No.
commissioner, but
Madam Chair, just one item to add or to discuss about the consent agenda. The item number two on the consent agenda, if that could be adopted and making that amendment retroactive to September 30th of 2020.
all righty. So a quick question procedure-wise, because we have informal and formal at the same time, and typically when we took a look at the consent agenda in the past, it's because we've had an informal discussion on it. So these procedurally would be able to be passed as one item with that one correction made then?
That's correct. And if there were any of the commissioners who wanted to pull one or another of those items off the consent agenda to have further discussion, you could do that as well. But otherwise, yes, you could adopt them in one action.
So then, thank you, Christian. I'd entertain a motion with the correction made by County Council to change the date from September 30th, 2021 to 2020 on item number 2 under contracts and grants.
No, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, we're not actually changing it. We are extending this contract through September 30th of 2021, but the amendment would need to be retroactive.
Oh, got
The
it.
approval of the amendment would need to be retroactive to September 30th of 2020.
All righty, got that. Okay. So then again, the amendment here would be that we would, on item number 2, make the approval of the amendment retroactive to September 30th, 2020.
Correct.
Okay, do we have a motion? Commissioner Kula, we can't hear you. Could you?
for some reason, I was holding the space bar down and it wasn't happening. But I'm glad to be the first one to do that today. I would move approval of the consent agenda with the modifications as noted by Counselor.
All right, we have a motion to approve. Any further discussion?
I have a point of clarification. So I wasn't going to vote on number 1 because I wasn't there for the meetings, but does that preclude me from voting for 2 and 3? Because it's a package, right?
I think we were just discussing that because you were not here. We talked about approving minutes for which you were not here. And I think, Ken, based on what we talked about, that there was nothing that would preclude a commissioner from voting on the consent agenda.
I don't believe so unless Christian has some thoughts on that. But you're muted, Christian.
If you wanted to make that clarification that you're voting on the consent agenda, but you're not voting on item 1, I think that's fine too.
Yep.
If you feel more comfortable doing that.
All right, so then we have a motion to approve the consent agenda, and Commissioner Berschauer has made a note that she will be removing item number 1 from her vote to approve the consent agenda because she wasn't here during the time those minutes were taken. So without any further discussion, we'll go ahead and call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. On to old business, item H. This is the consideration of the approval of the 2021 Yamhill County Board of Commissioners areas of liaison and responsibilities. So everybody's had a chance to look at those. And basically, are there any other revisions to that since we talked last week? Commissioner Kula.
And I'm unmuted. I did look through them and I feel very comfortable with them. The only thing I wanted to just flag is that I remember when I was a new commissioner, you and Commissioner Olson kindly pulled some things off of my plate. And so I'm totally comfortable with it as long as Commissioner Bershauer is comfortable with the numbers of departments and areas. But if there is anything that you're like, I just don't have the mental space for it, I'm happy to take those on and then we can change it.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Yes. Commissioner Bershauer?
I'm okay with it because I think we did pull off under community services and development, we did pull off the transit division and gave that to Commissioner Kula. But the rest of it is fine. I went through it with Ken, and a lot of the stuff on Commissioner Olson's list was some of his personal committees and boards that he was on. So it seemed at first a little daunting, but I think we're kind of working through it. But yeah, I'm okay with what we decided. Oh, also the Parkway Committee went to Kula, Commissioner Kula, I believe. So.
Correct.
Okay.
I answered Kula either way, so.
All right, thank you. So then entertain a motion to approve the areas of liaison for 2021.
I move that we approve the areas of liaison for 2021.
Thank you, Commissioner Kula. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. On to item H2, the consideration of the request to review the draft bylaws and mission statement for a proposed tourism advisory committee. And last week, and I believe on the 12th, we had December 12th, we had more in-depth discussion on this. And I'll just open it up for anybody who wants to make some initial comments. And maybe we could start with Ken. Is that appropriate, or should we just sort of dive into it at this stage?
I'm happy to, Commissioner. Just really quickly on, I'm not muted. Okay. Just really quickly, and I think, we've had this discussion, a couple times, and, we've revisited process. And I think if the board, or if there's going to be any action taken today, I believe the action for the process would be a motion along the lines of, first, the board wants to stand up this committee, and then county council and I would work on preparing the follow-up documents for standing up the committee. And so that would be kind of the first step. So you wouldn't necessarily be adopting the bylaws as presented or those items. It would be first the board taking a vote or an action to say that we want to stand up this committee.
Thank you. Commissioners? Commissioner Kula, do you want to start us off?
Yes, I'm happy to. I feel very comfortable with starting off by saying, we want to set up this committee and then working from there to adopt the bylaws as a second step.
Thank you. Commissioner Bershauer.
Sorry, needed to unmute. I guess I go back to my concern that we don't actually have a department specific to tourism. So I don't know why we would be standing up a committee that is sponsored by the county with the intent that this committee is going to advise us on tourism when we don't actually have a department that it would help inform. So I support, the committee and the effort to have that independently, but I'm not sure it's appropriate for us to be doing that. And if we don't actually have a department that would fit that, as we've done in the past.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kula, did you want to weigh in on that thought?
I'm happy to, Commissioner Chair. I will get this. Chair, I think that if we look at lots of different advisory committees, they are structured in different ways. They're all ultimately advisory to the elected officials who are related to them, right? Technically the investment advisory committee really is advising the treasurer. we have a place in it. That's why I think that you're the voting member, Chair, or at least you have been. So some committees are set up to advise their departments, and some committees, advisory committees, are set up to advise the public, and some are set up to advise directly to the Board of Commissioners. And I see this one as being of that nature.
But let's, I guess more specifically to the point, because I kind of had this question as well, is if we look at, I've been looking at the list of all our advisory committees and how they do have a direct connection, like for instance, the Board of Health, which is advisory to HHS. And so I look at the rest of them, for instance, SWAC or LIPSIC or RIAC. There's a direct connection to a policy, a department that then functions with a certain policy. So what I'm thinking of is I have appreciated the work that this group has done, and there have been so many iterations because there have been mostly volunteers that have been, putting in their time and their commitment to this effort. But I didn't see the connection to a specific county program, since we don't have, a lot of counties have tourism departments. We just don't.
Oh, okay, Chair, thank you. I think you said go ahead. Okay. In this case, I think that our direct policy area is economic development, right? There are obviously other areas of county operations that it does affect, but in this case, we have a policy area that is backed up by a fund, right? And I'm not suggesting, if we think about like where is the area, it's often tied to funds, budgets within our greater budget. I don't think that this advisory committee, at least Jeff Knapp's proposal, isn't to use any money that's economic development dollars, but it really is, we have, as a board, chosen to continue doing economic development policy work. And that's another way of talking about whether something is promoting business or detracting from a positive business environment. And so I see this as it's part of our pro-business mission as a county, which is tied to dollars.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ken, again, I wanted to go back to, and maybe this is a Christian question as well, and that is the formulation of committees and how that relates to the way we stand up these types of things under county structure. I know that we have, for instance, commissioners who will be part of them as non-voting members or sometimes as voting members. I'm thinking of the Mental Health and Disability Advisory Committee and that relation to, for instance, Health and Human Services and Public Health. So I guess at this point, what I'm seeing is that I would welcome this group coming to us on a quarterly basis or whenever they felt necessary and bringing us up to speed on some of the work that they're doing. But I don't know that it should be something that the county itself, without an anchor to it, and I know you mentioned economic development, but we've got economic development dollars that we have to spend, and that is why we have SEDCOR and they help us spending those dollars. But I don't see this as any kind of a revenue link. So at this point, I would just be interested in having them be advisory to the board in a non-formal capacity.
So I guess my question, thank you, Chair. But if you may, I. Okay, good. I guess I have a couple of thoughts on that. I don't know what it means for for an organization to advise the Board of Commissioners in an informal capacity. I guess I don't. Maybe you could flesh that out for me. The question I think I have is, how do your thoughts now relate to your comments in December? Because you seem to be very supportive of it, and I totally understand that things change. but you seemed very supportive of it then. At the time, I think I had suggested that it be an advisory committee similar to EDAC, where it's somewhat loosely associated with us. I guess that seems like an appropriate, unless we have EDAC, it's an advisory committee. It only does a few things, right? We talked about that, but it still exists. It still has members, and we call upon it to do things. I wonder if maybe that's the hybrid that you're suggesting, is something like that. Do you think that would work?
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. I think to your question about interest, I remember when we were dispersing those grants, and I remember it seemed to be a little bit unwieldy and convoluted. And towards the end, there were some people and organizations that had applied for grants and been on a short list. And I felt that it would have been more advantageous for the commissioners to have a little more input into those decisions. I remember in the past, we had the exact opposite problem because we had commissioners basically doing all the work of figuring out these grants. And that was a very laborious process, which is why we brought SEDCOR in. And I appreciate what Abishah has done and Carrie has done on just getting through some of these, the grant logistics, which have been quite tortuous, I'm sure, for them. But so yes, so I am supportive of this body of work, but I know that in the past I've had some concerns about how this could morph into something that is bigger than what the sort of the function creep we see sometimes, and I that is my concern, is that we wind up having one of those situations. So at this point, we're asked to take a look at the draft bylaws and the mission statement for this proposed tourism advisory committee. And either this will be something that we support in terms of support the work they do and ask them to be keeping in touch with us on a regular basis, because we see various components of the work they do, whether it's with public works or economic development or any planning, any number of different departments. But I don't see it living as a county, standing it up as a county advisory committee.
So I understand your vision for that. Do you have any suggestions on how to make it possible, I guess, that you've suggested like a regular update from them? Do you have any ideas on what that would look like?
Well, I remember receiving updates from the Cultural Coalition, and they really were very instructive as far as bringing us up to speed on some things that were going on in the county that we would not have known about, just how widespread their interactions and their involvement were with a variety of different sectors in arts and in history, those types of things. So those were very instructive. But it was not a component of the county. And so we got that information without having to have any kind of formal action in that capacity. And I would just see the same thing with this particular committee. Tourism is a big piece of what we do here in Yamhill County and what we rely on. I would love to have their input on a regular basis. And anybody, as you know, can say, I'd like to make a presentation to the board, and we're just, say when.
That's good to hear.
I would like to maybe even schedule regular updates like we do with our department heads, where we know on a regular basis we're going to be hearing from our various departments, and it won't be one of those things that gets lost where it goes a year without an update. So I would say that with every type of blessing from the board, where we basically just say, do good things. How can we support you? How can we do that? But I don't know that we need to have either a commissioner on there or a staff member on there, as was originally proposed.
If I may, Commissioner or Chair, yeah, I didn't intend for this to go so long, but I'm happy to. I'm happy to add more. I appreciate hearing your thoughts about that. The last time that we talked, which I think was last week, I had proposed that we, or maybe we proposed this together, I don't want to take credit for it, of striking out a commissioner who's like on the advisory committee, or who's an ex officio member. I think that it would be perfectly appropriate at a later date to address those bylaws if we had some interest in standing it up as an advisory committee. But what I hear you saying is essentially an advisory committee. When you're talking about saying we support you and we do good work and how can we help you, the tourism partnership has come to us and said, here's how you can help us.
Okay, and that makes sense, but help me understand, help me sort of with that disconnect about how they can possibly, they can do the work that needs to be done, but it doesn't necessarily have to become a function or a quasi-function of county government.
Right, and I'm assuming that what that looks like, because I don't want to speak for Jeff Knapp did a very good job of presenting to us a couple of different times.
Yes.
So I don't want to, I'm hesitant to cover the same ground because we've both been available for all those. What I can see out of this is that they've asked us to essentially call their tourism partnership an advisory committee to the county. And part of the benefit of that to them, as I recall, is that right now the county doesn't have an organization that speaks to the Willamette Valley Visitors Association. So for businesses that want to improve the tourism infrastructure, for example, in the county, there's nobody to speak on their behalf to the Willamette Valley Visitors Association. Now, Jeff Knapp is the designee from our area to WAVA, but there's not an official organization. And typically those organizations are connected, as he mentioned in our presentation, directly to transient lodging tax dollars. He said, in lieu of doing that, form us, recognize us as your advisory committee organization, and then we can be the player without the tax dollars.
That makes sense. Commissioner Berschauer, were you unmuting?
Thank you, Chair. And forgive me because I'm still kind of listening and absorbing. You guys have more experience with how these things have gone in the past, so I'm trying to catch up there. But on a kind of a macro level, tourism is economic development, but I feel like, in my experience in the county has been that we have quite a few organizations that promote tourism. We have statewide organizations that the wine industry and others pay into, essentially, and help promote the wine industry, especially in Yamhill County. We have city organizations that do that. I believe there's one in Newburgh as well, in McMinnville. So I have not seen, and then you have the chambers on top of that also promote economic development, which includes tourism. So I'm not seeing the need for some sort of formal committee sponsored by the county, where the point of those committees in other counties is to spend TLT tax dollars and to know where to target those dollars in order to bring up, a part of the county. So I'm just not seeing that. We don't have the structure behind it to support the need for a committee. I think it's great if they want to bring all of these disparate groups together and say, hey, we need more of a county voice. Let's be, singing from the same sheet music. But I'm not sure that I see the kind of the need for the underpinning of the committee, because we don't have that department. And I'm not personally interested in creating that department. So I guess I'm kind of, that's where I get stuck, is they're free to do this independently if there's a need there. I haven't seen a need for it necessarily. I've seen more of an immediate need from small businesses of how do we stay afloat through COVID, and how do we tackle some of these business taxes that are coming down the pike. So without having the institutional knowledge that you guys have for how these committees are formed and sort of how that goes, that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kula?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Berschauer. I totally recognize that, sometimes I'm trying to remember, and I think Chair Starrett is also doing this, of being like, okay, we need to, give a little bit of backstory to some of this, and obviously you're gonna catch up really quickly. So don't worry about that. I do know that when the folks on the Tourism Partnership came to us, their specific ask was that the small businesses and these like working businesses, mom and pop organizations had the need for a voice at the table with the larger, it's as you alluded to, it's this galaxy of travel, visitor economy, recreation, food and beverage businesses and organizations. So to have a place at the table, they need to have essentially the equivalent of a DMO, a destination marketing organization that's at the scale of across the county. And in lieu of having a transient lodging tax that funds that, and that goes towards, 70% of it goes towards marketing and promoting the businesses within the community. In lieu of the tax generation, they are asking for a seat at the table in the greater community of destination marketing by having an advisory committee to the county. And I know that's kind of weird because they're typically, what I've seen at least is that advisory committees talk into the county, all the time. A department will provide something to them and say, hey, what do you think? And it's always inward looking. This is a somewhat unique situation, although not totally unique, where we would be asking them to advise us, but we're also asking them to represent us in the greater community across the state and honestly across the globe. Because as you all know, our community, our little rural community is a global draw. And so for that, I recognize them, I'm trying to listen to them. And I also want to make sure that when we draft any kind of bylaws, that there's like a firewall, I guess, of like, here's what the county can do for you, and here's what we expect you to do. And there isn't this isn't the first step of calling for a tax. Because I think that I'm here that we're all in consensus on that one.
Yeah, I going back just for a little of the backstory, and I'm not sure, Commissioner Kula, if you were here for this, when they came to us, because as an organization, there were several iterations. There was a membership organization that dealt with tourism, and they were not able to sustain themselves because people were either not finding value or couldn't afford it or chose not to. So then they came to the county and said, could you help us financially with some commitment to keep us doing this work? And the decision was made at that time that that was not something that the board was interested in funding. So there was that piece. And I think that sort of is some of the carryover for the way I'm looking at this is again, initially there was the interest in the transit lodging tax, and I was not supportive of that. And that is perhaps one of all the taxes out there, I think that is the one that is the easiest to justify. But in the end, it was one of those things that I felt that we could certainly do without. So at this point, it's very compelling, but I don't see why the work can't proceed without the county without us having bylaws and all of that. And could this organization not have bylaws that don't include the county and still represent us at the table? Because certainly if they came to us with an ask for some support in regards to economic development, there's nothing that precludes us from not supporting that.
Yeah,
Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to make sure. Thank you, Chair. I think that based upon what I've heard from them, at the presentations, because it's really, we've had the presentations. I have to assume that in good faith, they are sharing with us what they need in order to have a seat at that greater table. And if that means that we have this advisory committee whose sole organizational existence is to fulfill that obligation, similar to, honestly, when we had, this was before my time, but when we had the solid waste advisory committee in two pieces, right? And one of them was just statutorily required. And then we merged them because we wanted to have advice on all solid waste issues. Perhaps this is how that one lives, is that it has an advisory committee title and it has bylaws, but its responsibility is really as the seat at the table in the greater ecosystem. But I understand, and it's helpful to hear from you. I did understand some of that backstory, but it's helpful to hear your perspective.
One of the things I remember is there was I think it was an ask several years ago, Ken, I don't know if you were part of that discussion, when it came to signage, for instance, on county roads regarding for bicycle safety. And I'm not sure what group that, I believe, I'm not sure under what name that group came to us asking for that commitment to have more signage. And I think Commissioner Kula, were you involved in that even prior to your being on the board? It was the signage on county roads. So that was an example of them coming to the county and saying, hey, would you fund this? And we had some concerns about the legality of doing that.
I'm not recalling my participation in that, although I feel like I should take credit for it since that's the memory. But I do know that the blue signs that the county has through Public Works have been, they are an effective, the blue signs plus the kiosks, at those random corners around the county where we already have a right of way. Those are a good example of businesses in the county who want people to know about them, who are participating in a self-sustaining operation, where the funding for it is always going, and renewals are always going towards maintaining former old kiosks, covering staff time, and carrying forward to building new ones.
Thank you. Kristen, you might remember, and I'm not sure, Ken, if you would remember, I remember working with Kathy George toward the tail end of her time as a commissioner, and she'd really been instrumental in that blue sign project and spent a lot of time working with Public Works on that. That was a years long initiative, but I'm not quite sure, because I know the revenue goes to Public Works for a self-sustaining, basically it pays for itself, that blue sign program, so that it's an annual renewal for businesses, and yet it goes to Public Works. Do you remember how we have that worked out?
I remember the conversations. I remember the policy actions that the board took. The details, I apologize, I don't have off the top of my head. I'm happy to look those up, but I believe you're right that the idea is that what the county charges to create those signs, build the kiosks, put them in place, is designed to simply cover our costs and make that available to businesses that are interested in taking advantage of that. And then I know we hired a contractor out of Sheridan to develop, design and build the kiosks and do all of that. But I can certainly find out some additional detail for you if that's not enough to answer your question.
Thank you. Commissioner Kula, did you want to respond to that?
Oh no, I think that Christian covered it. Those are the details of the program, and it seems to be working well. I know that for some businesses, they didn't like the look of having 25 sandwich boards with balloons and all on the side of the road at some of the more busy intersections. But I believe it was actually Jeff Knapp who proposed the blue sign and kiosk, but back in the day.
Right. That was a I think it was a very effective tool for tourism. And so that's just an example there of being able to work with the county on a specific project that didn't require any kind of formal committee. Basically, it was Jeff Knapp or whoever was instrumental in spearheading that, going to the county, and Kathy George, Commissioner George, really did pretty much carry that program. Christian?
Well, I just amazingly enough, with a couple of clicks, I found the policy from 2014, and it looks like it actually came, at least in part, through RIAC. So we did have some engagement and involvement in this from RIAC. So there is that connection back to another advisory committee.
Thank you. So I think that's a really good illustration of how at any point anybody can work with an existing county committee and carry something forward, where the county is now sponsoring this initiative. And it didn't take a committee, it took an existing committee to be the vehicle for that. So I don't want to belabor this. I just want to make sure that we still allow for the work to be done with great acceptance and support and encouragement, but not make it another county committee. Commissioner Kula?
I just want to ask one I don't know, concluding question, which is I know that Jeff, when he presented this to us on behalf of the members of the tourism partnership, he said that this was important as part of that outward facing into the world. Should we check in with him about whether what it would require at the county level to have the structure necessary for him to have a seat at the table on behalf of visitor economy businesses in Yamhill County?
I think that's a really key piece. I think that's something we should consider, and if that is the case, that's important. So I would, perhaps we can ask Jeff to weigh in on that, and maybe continue this discussion when we have that piece of information. Is that agreeable to everybody?
It sounds good to me. I can reach out to him if you wish.
Yes, I think that'd be good for us to know. Thank you for doing that, Commissioner Kula. All right, so if it's okay with everybody else, we'll go ahead and we'll just move on from that item H2, and we'll consider that for more discussion perhaps next week if we have that bit of information. And thank you for doing that. On to item H3, and this is discussion to send a letter of support to Oregon Representatives Mike Neerman, E. Werner Reske, and Senator Dennis Linthicum to overturn Governor Brown's executive orders related to COVID-19. At this point, my understanding is there are 4 states that are in the process of or will soon be filing bills to limit governors' powers over state legislatures. One of the questions that I've gotten as a commissioner is, how is it that these particular mandates, executive orders, and what some people are considering arbitrary closures of certain businesses, how is that allowed to be without any legislative input? And that's been a question I've struggled with too, that typically, our form of government has various branches for checks and balances, so that you have the elected representatives in addition to the governor weighing in on different decisions. And the legislature hasn't had any input on these. It's been coming up on, we're 10 months into this, and you're getting the emails and I'm getting the emails from people who are just desperate for some kind of help. So the reason I brought this to the board is as a statement of support for our businesses, and also to basically say to the governor's office, we'd like a little bit of legislative input, and one way to do that is through a suit. So I'll just open it up for discussion.
Thank you, Chair. You did open it up, so I was like, but she didn't call on me. I read through the materials. Thank you for getting them to me. Thanks everybody who made sure I had them beforehand. I read through them, and I first I started with the complaint, and then I looked at the amended complaint. And the thing that stuck out in my mind was I was hearing three members of the legislature essentially their main argument, as I saw it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is their argument, is that the legislature failed to act to limit the governor's powers in the event of an emergency. And that's not unless I'm wrong in that, but I don't believe I am, because then I read the response, the request for summary judgment from the defendants. Unless I'm wrong, I think that the response to that is you're members of a legislature, albeit in the minority, but we all know that the minority has power. They might not have as much as they want, but we see every day minority members making progress on issues by speaking up. Essentially, what I saw was what I read in the defendant's motion for summary judgment was the same thing that came to mind, was you're part of the legislature. The legislature has met 3 times already, and with the opportunity to present legislation that limits the governor's power. And if you didn't get the legislation that you wanted, which I don't know if they introduced a bill or not, but if you didn't get it, suing the governor is typically not the route to go. And that's basically the plain spoken version of what the defendant said. What I don't see in the last week, you signed a letter that was a statement of support to small business, or to businesses. I chose not to sign it because I was not provided the opportunity to introduce amendments to it. Similarly, that happens at the legislature, where people didn't get they didn't get amendments, so they don't vote for it. But I struggle to see how this letter telling 3 legislators that we support them supports supports businesses in our community, whatever the scale of them. So I just want to put that out there, that that's how I was seeing it, is that the legislature is the venue for this. The legislature chose not to take it up, and that supporting a lawsuit is not my cup of tea for that. But I appreciate you bringing it up, because pressure is important during advocacy, right?
Thank you for that, Commissioner. I appreciate that. Commissioner Berschauer, any thoughts?
Thank you. I have received, and we all have probably received, some public feedback on this particular item. But most of what I've noticed about the feedback is that it's focused on who is bringing forth the lawsuit versus the actual substance of why we're having an issue with the legislative process. Really, it's not even breaking down, it just never happened. So, Commissioner Cool, I appreciate that while the legislative process should work, we all know who controls those sessions. The governor does so in conjunction with the majority leaders, and the rest of the folks really don't have much of a say. And I think that the intention of the emergency powers for the governor never intended for her to be able to continue in perpetuity, not only having that kind of authority, but the result of some of her decisions actually have legislative impacts. And so that's the crux of the argument. And I will say that, it doesn't really matter to me who is filing the lawsuit. It could be Democratic representatives from Portland. I don't really care. I'd support that kind of pushback, because I think that she has overstepped her authority. And the legislative process has not even been on the table, which is such a shame, because as we know, we are the ones accountable to the people when these kinds of things come through. I will speak frankly that the governor isn't really interested in accountability, because she is not up for re-election. That's just not even on the table for her. So convenient, but that doesn't help the folks who are really trying to make a difference and support their community. You guys have been on some of the commissioner calls lately with the governor's office. You know, I was actually pretty surprised to hear pushback from, and this is their own self-description of themselves, but very progressive commissioners from Washington, Multnomah counties that are expressing concern about how these orders and the way that the governor is sort of justifying them, the science behind it isn't quite adding up for people, and they're concerned about that. So it's not just a partisan thing. I want to make sure that we don't fall into that trap of, oh, just because it's, you know, Republican legislators that are putting this forward, it's not a partisan issue. Everyone is concerned about this. And oftentimes, you know, when the legislative process breaks down, the legal process is the fallback, or at least a parallel effort. So I'm not opposed to sending a letter that essentially states that not only are we also concerned about overreach and the legal basis for the governor's orders, but that we support a parallel effort to make sure we are all accountable to Oregonians.
Thank you, Commissioner. A couple of points. I highlighted a few points in the suit, and one of them are really, for me, speaks to the crux of this. As a result of the unitary control of Oregon by a single political party, the legislature as an institution lacks the incentive to defend its constitutional prerogatives against encroachment by the executive. So while we have sort of one party rule, that party is not really necessarily looking to go against what the executive branch is doing. So there really isn't that impetus. And in particular, as a whole, because it is a supermajority, the legislature is not resisting the governor's ongoing exercise of emergency powers to address this COVID-19 through executive orders that should be addressed through the legislature itself. So we can argue all day long whether or not Oregon allows the governor to have these broad executive powers. But I think at this point, we're in a crisis. We're in a crisis where people are killing themselves, where their businesses are completely and utterly every day. And the last one was from a business in Carlton that said, I can't do this anymore. And people who have spent enormous amounts of money, and we have to ask, where does it end? So when we have efforts like this, I think what we're saying that the delegation to the governor of all these police powers under the ORSs it's not justified. So these plaintiffs are basically saying, as legislators, they're not getting to do their job. Don't you think? I would believe that the legislators, the people who have to face re-election every 2 or 4 years, would be a little more vocal should they have the opportunity to go to the governor and say, hey, my people are saying they can't stay in business anymore. I think we'd get more input from our legislature if they had that ability. Commissioner.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I really appreciate your thoughts on this. As you know, I don't agree with their lawsuit. I think it's pretty flawed, but I really appreciate your bringing it up because it brings up a lot of questions about kind of what our role is, what the legislature's role is. And I also want to note that I do appreciate Commissioner Bershauer has way more experience than me at the legislative level, as far as I understand. So I also want to acknowledge that. I think it's important. I think it's valuable that we have these different skills and experiences. I think that it's, I don't agree with the statement within the complaint, the amended complaint, that because one party controls the legislature, that they don't have an incentive to uphold the Constitution. I don't think that that's a very accurate statement, and I hope that it's not something that we will support. To go back to what Commissioner Bershauer had asked about, the letter that's before us now doesn't do what you have suggested. I think we have a lot of opportunities to support the legislature or encourage the legislature to do what we might feel is their job. And I would sign on to something encouraging the legislature to consider I think actually Commissioner Starrett and I, Chair Starrett and I, talked about this what's probably eons ago, which is to encourage the legislature to put guardrails on the emergency, the extended state of emergency. We both talked about, I don't remember how long ago it was, but you probably remember. It was a long time ago, where we said, let's ask the legislature to put guardrails on this, or at least consider putting them on it so that there's accountability going forward. I think that's probably more of an appropriate response for us than from than signing a letter of support to 3 legislators trying to overturn a law that they had an opportunity to, and I don't actually know if they ever submitted a bill for. So to that end, have any 3 of these commissioners submitted a bill at any point in this, on the subject?
So I think realistically, Commissioner, you know about how much power and influence that the minority party has at this juncture. So whether or not a bill has been submitted, it doesn't change the fact that right now we're looking at sort of an 11th hour fix to what's going on. So there are 3,000 bills that have been submitted. It could very well be, but do we necessarily expect in all reality that the supermajority would even consider such a bill? Commissioner.
Thank you. I want to make sure that you're our chair, and it's taking me a while to remember that I don't get to just talk. I want to respect that. I would recall that we've had a number of special sessions already where there were opportunities. And so that's why I'm wondering, do you know if any of these legislators introduced, or do you know of other legislators who introduced bills? Because I know how the process works, just like you do. They can introduce it, and even if it doesn't come up for a vote, at least there's conversations around it. So I apologize if I don't know the answer to that, and I could probably go through all of this to see.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you. My guess is that the rules around this predated most of these legislators, and certainly no one expected COVID to come out of thin air. So, I don't know that that's necessarily a fair argument for them. If it was a concern, ongoing concern before, then, perhaps it just wasn't addressed. I don't know, but I think that the conversation that we'd be having on a statewide level would be very different if legislators were allowed to be at the table for that, because you have Democratic legislators who are elected in some pretty, coastal regions, blue collar type of regions, places where small businesses are the backbone of the economy. And I think that conversation would be very different. And so the fact that they have not been able to really be at the table is concerning. And it seems like we are mostly in agreement that there should be some sidebars on this. So whether or not it's this specific lawsuit that we're saying yes to, or if it's, a letter that addresses the lawsuit, but also sort of has some overarching themes with regards to our concerns, then, I'm okay if we want to craft something that's a little bit more specific to where we're coming together on this. But I do think that there are a lot of Democratic legislators in Oregon who are very concerned with what's going on, but they have not been allowed to voice that. They have not had a seat at the table. So this is not a partisan issue. And so anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there that, if we are interested in altering the letter, editing it a little bit to be a little bit more about how we support the sidebars, we're concerned about what's going forward. I don't necessarily oppose a legal avenue, because I think at this point that's all that we have. And we don't really know what's going to come from the legislative session, because the public is, for all intents and purposes, shut out of it. So So if that's something we can put on the table, I'm willing to do that. If we want to alter it a little bit, and I'm willing to take suggestions as to what gets put in there. But I do think time is of the essence, and businesses are closing every day. We've got cities in our county right now who have, the small businesses have come together and basically said to their mayor, we're opening regardless, and you're not going to do anything about it, and because we're not going to survive. So we're in a state of crisis within our own county. And I do think that we need to continue to push hard against this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kula, would you, in regards to revising this, making it something that, in your estimation, would be more palatable, but still, as Commissioner Bershauer pointed out, really is strong, because we're not at the point. This is time for us to be bold, and we're not getting anywhere. How many letters have we written to the governor? How many letters have we written, and please, and everybody else has written letters, and organizations have written letters, and we've gotten nowhere. And it's easy for us to sit here because we're going to get a paycheck tomorrow. So I'm of the mind that we really don't have a lot of time to finesse types of pleas to the governor. She's not been responsive. What would you recommend we do, Commissioner Kula?
I so appreciate that, because it acknowledges me while also putting me in the hot seat. And I saw that eyebrow raise. Okay, so what I guess what I come back to with a letter is that I would be interested to know, and so I will do my research. This is an acknowledgement that I haven't gone through OLIS. So for the current session, I will look through and see if there are any bills up specifically about the state of emergency powers. And then I'll look back through previous sessions and look for bills that address those, because you and I signed on to a letter in the spring specifically about asking for guardrails, and I bring us back to the legislature because this is something that they can do. Commissioner Bershauer's note about Democratic lawmakers. If there are Democratic lawmakers, and by that I interpret that to be people who are either Oregon State House or Senate members who are Democrats who have expressed support for a limitation on emergency powers. If you know of somebody, I'm happy to reach out to them. I'm happy to pull together all those resources and then write a letter that's very specifically addressed at that, that maybe has a modicum of at least of support from both sides, both caucuses at the State House.
Thank you.
That was a long answer, sorry.
Thank you for that. Couple of things come to mind. We have not seen the political will on the in the majority party to date, 10 months into this crisis, to do anything other than go along and echo what the governor's policies have been. Not once. We have seen some very outspoken members of the Oregon legislature, and I will point out Senator Linthicum, who has been very bold and very unequivocal in saying that this is overreach on the part of the executive branch. But I've not heard of any members of the majority party who have even made a peep about challenging the governor's executive powers. Not once. So if we're going to depend on and have to start looking through reams of documentation on OLIS for this, it shouldn't be something we have to look for, because the ones who have been vocal about it have not been members of the majority party. I don't think we have a lot of time to write more letters. I think the only way anything is ever going to get done is through a lawsuit, and I'll illustrate that with the reason why our churches today are open to general capacity is because of a lawsuit that was filed in another state. And as a result of that, the private schools, the faith-based schools, were also required to open. So on the heels of that, we see all of a sudden that the public schools are now going to be allowed to open. So the only thing that was the catalyst for that was one lawsuit in another state. So I don't particularly want to wait for someone else to prevail in another state, in another court of law. I think it's certainly not our lawsuit, but it could be something we could support by saying enough is enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chair. Commissioner Berkshire, are there specific lawmakers on the Democrat or the Majority Caucus that you can suggest I reach out to?
I can try and track that down. I haven't seen anybody come forward specifically, but I'm talking about certain districts that flipped. There were significant numbers of districts that flipped from Democratic to Republican legislators, and I'm assuming that they might be a little concerned. But small businesses exist all over the state, so I'm not saying that one side is not necessarily concerned about the impact, but it takes somebody to come forward and actually push that. So the discussion that we're having is, are we going to get behind the people who are pushing this forward because we agree on principle that this is causing real harm. The entire reason we're having this conversation is because it is causing immediate harm. These actions by the governor are having a significant impact. And we don't exist in a bubble. There are states across the entire nation that are open, that don't have these types of restrictions. Their businesses are not being subjected to these laws and rules by the governor. And so I go back to the fact that this is not making sense to most people. And they are questioning what's happening and why we're not pushing back and actually demanding answers. And I have sent emails after emails to the governor's staff asking for the data that supports some of these shutdown restrictions, the metrics around it. I haven't received anything. So who's going to stand up and fight for our small businesses, fight for our families, if it's not us? And if the legal route is the only route at this point to push that forward and get that done, because we all know the legislature is controlled by a specific party. That party happens to be the party that the governor belongs to. And, they're not going to challenge the governor. I mean, let's just speak frankly. They're not going to challenge the governor. So if it's coming forward by a group of legislators who are willing to stand up and take the arrows, and on principle, we agree that, we need to have some accountability around what's happening here because it's not happening in other states, then I'm willing to sign on to it. Oh, and one more thing. Someone sent me a list of all of the bills, like a summary of all the bills that were introduced. So I can forward that to both commissioners. So you can look through, that way you're not digging through a list, but it's actually kind of a spreadsheet of what's in there. So I'll send that on.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Berkshire, I may have misheard the comment about Democratic lawmakers who were expressing frustration or wanting to see a change. Was that directed at legislators? Because if they're, I seriously, I will reach out to these legislators if I know that they have expressed that level of support. But I thought I heard that earlier.
Sorry, I was muted. I have heard from folks privately. They have not publicly pushed out and said, we don't agree with this. A lot of Democratic lawmakers in Oregon are small business owners themselves, so I know they are very concerned. But obviously, whether they're going to come out publicly or not, I don't know. it's, it's worth having a conversation with them, as well as county commissioners, because, as Commissioner Freeman said yesterday on a call or 2 days ago on a call, the buck stops with us. We're the ones who have to bear the brunt of some of the frustration that's happening out there. So, if somebody's willing to stand forward and fight the legal route, and we can send support that way, even though we're not getting involved in the lawsuit, then, I think it's worth it. And I think we should be asking other people to come on board.
Commissioner Kula.
Thank you. Apparently, I'm so full of talk today. Thank you, Commissioner Bershauer. I look forward to hearing from some of the folks that you have mentioned, even if not by name. I'm not going to support these three legislators in their legal route attempts until I feel very comfortable with evidence that they've tried. I'd love to see tried in the legislature. That is the way that this can change. And if it hasn't changed, then of course that is the courts are another option, as you noted. But if I haven't seen a bill that they've introduced with the details of why it wasn't put out on the table for discussion, then I'm not going to support it, because I know what the roots are for each of us, right? Like we know what our role is in the county, for example. They know what their role is in the legislature, and they'd love to see their efforts in the legislature. And then I'm definitely open to discussing.
Thank you, Commissioner Kula. A couple of things about that. We all know that the minority party doesn't stand a chance in bills that they particularly want to advance. We've seen it with a number of bills in the past. We've seen our minority party walk out to keep certain what they consider very ominous legislative actions from becoming law. I think that for us to say that unless and until we can see proof that they've gone through the legislative process to deal with this, we won't support any action which pushes back on executive branch overreach, doesn't address the fact that we're dealing with an extremely critical issue, and that the only way for us to handle that at this point, I believe, is through judicial action. And we know that the legislative process is going to take months and months and months that our businesses just don't have. And so at this point, the only thing that I would do is ask for an amendment to item H3 that says discussion to send a letter of support to Oregon Representatives Mike Neerman, E. Werner Reske, Senator Dennis Linthicum to overturn Governor Brown's executive orders related to COVID-19. That should also include a letter to the governor and to the council to the governor, which I believe I can send those particular names. Council for this particular action. So at this point, I'm going to call for the question and ask if there is support and a motion to support item H3.
Just really quickly, commissioners, I apologize for interruption, and I know you're looking for a motion. In the packet, there is a draft letter that was put in there, and I just wanted to say that the last request that you had for the agenda item about having it copied to the governor, and that is included on the letter that's before you for consideration as a courtesy copy to the other parties that you listed.
Correct. And that letter says, dear, and it lists the legislators who are listed in this suit. Yamhill County Commissioners support the amended complaint in the Circuit Court for the State of Oregon for the County of Multnomah for injunction, declaratory judgment in case number 20CV37213 regarding Governor Brown's exercise of Chapter 401 emergency powers, which has curtailed legislative powers of sweeping scope, powers that are reserved exclusively for the Legislative Assembly by the Oregon Constitution. And it also it does include a copy to Governor Brown. So that's what the letter says, and that is what the vote is today. So I will make a motion for us to approve sending that letter to the legislators, to Governor Brown, and to her attorneys. Any further discussion?
I just had one. Thank you, Chair. I just had one note is that I would support a letter that says, we support your efforts, and then list the representatives. We support your efforts to work through the legislative process to provide guardrails for this for these extensive emergency powers. So I just want to put that on the record, is that is what I would vote for. But I recognize that you have a different motion on the table.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Before we get to vote on this, would you like to at some point propose a letter to the Oregon legislators, and perhaps to our delegation in the county, to suggest that they work through these particular executive broad powers legislatively? But that would be separate, because what we're talking about here is a lawsuit that's been filed. So are you interested, Commissioner Kula, in bringing that back before us as a separate action, that we write a letter asking for a procedure, that perhaps we have a bill sponsored by somebody in a priority bill, perhaps, that hasn't used up all their priority bills, to get that on the docket for this session? But that's,
yes.
Thank you. Would that be something you would be interested in doing?
I would be supportive of that. I want to make sure that I get the list of bills that Commissioner Berschauer was going to forward on to us, and then I can scan through it and make sure that there's nothing else that's already addressing that. And then I'll do a little bit more research to see if they've happened before, because I would feel silly writing something on something that's already happened and been addressed. But I can do that work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that will be a wonderful addition to our efforts to try to get our legislators to get off the dime and put a little pressure on the governor, because we certainly haven't been successful. So, well, at this point, I'm going to call for the question, and we have a motion on the table. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Okay, so the motion passes 2-1. Thank you.
And don't be so hard on yourself. You've moved the needle.
Well, I haven't moved the needle very much, but I know that, all we can do is try. Go ahead.
Chair, I just want to say that I would support Commissioner Kula's letter to encourage legislative action as well. I think both tracks are worthy of supporting. So I just want to put that on the record as well.
Yes, and I know that other states don't have not delegated such broad powers to their executive branch. So really, a lot of it, the onus is on our legislators. That being said, that old saying, doesn't matter how the donkey got in a ditch, we need to get the donkey out. And that's our job, is to do the best we can to help our community survive this. So thank you all for the discussion. It's very, very important. So we'll move on to other business, which is I, and that is consideration of approval of declaring the following items as surplus from the Sheriff's Office to be sold to staff or resold to a third-party firearms dealer at the fair market value resale set price. A, 3 Model Glock 22 40 caliber, serial number PLH933, serial number KTX791, serial number KTX790, and affiliated holsters and magazines. Is there any discussion or questions about this? Typical surplus action. All right. Motion to approve.
I move that we approve.
Motion to approve item I1. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. On to item I2, consideration of approval of declaring one 2000 Ford 15-passenger van VN IFB SS31LXY HB98486 as county surplus with an estimated value of $4,411 to be donated to Champion Team. Commissioner Kula, did you want to comment on perhaps the need for this?
I certainly can. It's probably something that's more appropriate for Ken or Christian, since it's a surplus. I'm happy to acknowledge that I am a board member of Champion Team at the moment. I believe, and this is far predates me, that there was a passenger van that was on loan or on lease from the county to Champion Team. Ken, do you have any more specifics about it?
I don't have the specifics. I don't have the background information, but you are correct. This is a van that the HHS has leased to Champion Team for quite some time. And so this isn't, Champion Team already has this van, and we've been essentially doing a $1 lease, and it's for supporting programs the Champion Team is doing. And at this point, we're just looking at, instead of continuing to under this lease agreement, is to just go ahead and surplus the van and donate it to Champion Team.
All righty, motion to approve.
I move that we approve item I2.
All right, any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. On to public hearings. We have none. Announcements. We'll start with you, Commissioner Kula.
Oh my goodness. Well, all three of us, actually, I don't know, but we were all invited yesterday to the OHA vaccine distribution, and I hope that it was helpful to you. I feel like it left me with more questions than answers, but it also gave me some reassurance that every other county public health department is working under a similar situation to ours, which is that they don't have enough doses, but that they're delivering them as quickly as they can and very efficiently. So that was hard to hear, that there was only going to be 50,000 new folks inoculated per week going forward for the foreseeable future, because that's really slow. So I just want to acknowledge that was hard to hear. But I think that Commissioner Berschauer made a really good observation, which is that we're pretty united in some of that concern across the regional spectrum, as it were. So I appreciated hearing and seeing that. We have Road Improvement Advisory Committee tonight, and we also have the Transit Advisory Committee this afternoon. So I will be at both of those. And I look forward to hearing what they all have to say. I think that for now, that's it. But I'm happy to hear from all of you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kula. Commissioner Berschauer, any announcements?
I'm sure I will have some in the future, but I don't at the moment. So thank you.
All right, thank you both. Just an update, let's see. As of now, I believe Curry County, Jackson County is in the hopper, but Curry County, Yamhill County, and Josephine County have filed their resolution/board orders, which is what we passed on the 17th, now waiting for court validation, which I believe, Christian, was filed yesterday, which we'll spend 3 weeks waiting. We'll have a comment period, and then we'll ask the court to take up our court validation of that resolution, which gives some cover to businesses that have been cited by OSHA. We're certainly hearing from more and more businesses that have been getting a knock on the door, not only from public health, but from OSHA and OLCC. So for what it's worth, it's just another action we can take to let the governor know that we're really supportive of our community's businesses. And also been continuing to work on Newburgh Sportsman Air Park and trying to get some funding through an FAA program and through the state. And that has been in many years process, but we did take further action yesterday, and hopefully at the county level, we'll be able to get an idea whether there'll be support from the state for helping out in maintenance and improvements at the Newburgh Airport. Ken, did you have anything for us?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to really quickly, as far as the COVID vaccinations, I just wanted to add on to that our public health team has been putting together some outreach efforts, and there's information on the on our county website. There's including they've created a new weekly newsletter that provides information out there about vaccinations and the status of things. And so I just wanted to put in a plug for the, our public health team and the work that they're doing to get information out there. That's the first part. The second part that I'm hoping that in the next week or so is to come back to the board and have a discussion. I just wanted to because I know Commissioner Bershauer, you had some, you brought up last week some questions about fairgrounds and their current budgetary status and the challenges that they've been facing under a lot of the closures and trying to keep up with things. I did do some budget analysis and I was able to connect with Gary Wirtz this week, and I'm looking at his notes. So I feel really confident that I'd be able to come back and talk to the board possibly as early as next week, next formal session, to talk about the fairgrounds and some possible budgetary needs that we may need to address to help the fairgrounds navigate the crisis that they're having right now, because Gary's made a lot of expenditure cuts because of the impacts and the no revenue. And we know that with the wildfires and some of the other things that there was some challenges that they've also been presented with, that they stepped up and provided some assistance as needed and required. And I recognize that they're not necessarily having a lot of events, but that is a facility that still has to be maintained. And unfortunately, some of the cuts that in order to stay within budget, some of those have been along the lines of maintenance. And so I just wanted to, if the board is okay with it, I would like to maybe even possibly get something on the agenda for next week, or maybe I invite Gary to join, and then we can make a request to the board.
Thank you for that. I'd love to hear from Gary. I know he's been sort of been out there struggling. So thank you. That would be great. Kristen, did you have anything for us? Okay, thank you. Well, since we have nothing else for the good of the order, we'll go ahead and adjourn today's meeting. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next Thursday. Bye.